Jesus was bleeding and dying on the cross, he prayed for those who were taunting him. He prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus told the parable of the unmerciful servant. Peter came up to him and said, "Lord, how many times should I forgive my brother when he sins against me? Up to 7 times? He was patting himself on the back, pretty proud of himself. Boy, forgiving someone 7 times, that's pretty impressive, isn't it? And Jesus looked at Peter and said, "No, Peter, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. And then Jesus told a parable about a king who wanted to settle his accounts. And one servant was brought in before him who owed him millions of dollars in debt. The king said, "Can you pay?" The man said, "No." The king said, "Throw that man into prison." But the man got down on his knees and begged the king, "Please give me time and I'll pay it all back." And we read that Jesus said the king had pity on him and canceled his debt. That's what forgiveness is, canceling a debt. The servant got up, walked out of the palace, saw a fellow servant walking down the street who owed him 3 months' wages. Not millions of dollars, 3 months' wages. The servant said to his fellow servant, "Pay up now. You owe it to me." The fellow servant said, "Please be patient with me and I'll pay it all back." The servant said, "No, I want it now. You owe me." The man said, "I can't pay you." And the servant had his fellow servant thrown into prison. Some other folks saw what happened. They went to the king and they said, "Oh, king, remember that servant whose millions of dollars of debt you canceled? You forgave? Well, he just threw a man into prison for being unable to pay back a few months' debt." Outraged, the king called that servant in, said, "Let me get it straight. You just threw a man in prison for 3 months' debt when I just canceled millions of dollars debt of yours?" And the king threw that servant into prison. Then Jesus says some of the most scary verses in the Bible. He says, "This is how my Father will treat you unless you forgive your brother from your heart." What is forgiveness? Forgiveness is canceling a debt. Forgiveness is dismissing a debt. Forgiveness is giving up your right to hate someone for the dastardly thing they've done to you. Forgiveness is not letting someone off the hook, but forgiveness is transferring a person from hanging on your hook to hanging on God's hook. In other words, forgiveness is not saying, "Nothing wrong happened, let's forget everything and act like everything's just fine." That's not forgiveness, that's amnesia. Forgiveness is saying, "That was wrong what you did, but I forgive you. I cancel your debt. I'm not going to hang you on my hook and judge you. Instead, I'm going to trust God to judge you, and it's my business to forgive you, to dismiss the debt, to free you." And then I hope we can reconcile. I hope we can restore our broken relationship so that we can live together in joy, in peace, and in harmony. Victor Hugo had a tremendous grasp of forgiveness, of God's grace. In his outstanding book, Les Miserables, Victor Hugo portrays Jean Valjean as a man who went to prison for 19 years for stealing a loaf of bread. Upon release from prison, Jean Valjean had no place to go. He had no money, he had no food, no lodging. But a very kind bishop and his sister took him in for the night. Late that night, Jean Valjean stole the silverware from the bishop and ran away. Early the next morning, the soldiers who had caught Jean Valjean brought him back to the door of the bishop, knocked on the door. They were sure that Jean Valjean was a thief. They were expecting to throw him into prison for the rest of his life and slam the door shut on him. But when the bishop opened the door, he looked into the face of Jean Valjean and says, "Jean Valjean, you forgot the candlesticks." And then he says to the soldiers, "He didn't steal anything. I gave them this as a gift, this silver, but he forgot the candlesticks." And then he says to Jean Valjean after the soldiers have left, "Never forget this. Never, never forget this. I have bought you back to be an honest man." The grace, the forgiveness that Jean Valjean experienced from that bishop radically melted his granite heart and will. Jean Valjean was tough. Nobody beat him physically. Jean Valjean was tough psychologically. Nobody could break him down. But confronted by the amazing grace of God, of Christ, expressed through that bishop, his granite heart melted. he repented. And he became an honest man. He became a man who understood that the purpose of my life is to work hard and then to help other people, to be generous to others, to give to others. And that is what a follower of Christ is. A follower of Christ is someone who understands that the heart of the cosmos is a God who really does love you and me, so much so that when we rebelled against him and went our own way, instead of washing his hands of us and discarding us, he sent his only Son, Jesus Christ, on a rescue mission to pull us back into, to invite us back into an eternal love relationship with him, the living God. Now, when God loves you, you have to make a decision. You either respond to that love by melting and loving him, or else you just remain hard and reject that love. I plead with you. Choose to respond by melting in the face of his love. Ask him for forgiveness. Put your faith and trust in him and commit your life to him. That is the most wise response to the grace, the forgiveness of Jesus Christ.